6 Democratic women in Colorado running for the Senate, all of them elected officials, state senators, state representatives, wrote a letter to the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee saying, please rescind your endorsement of Hickenlooper, that we need a real progressive in the Senate. Progressives are really moving forward. I mentioned in the previous hour, somebody called in and said, well, you know, if you're going to have somebody who's running in a Democratic primary on your show, because I had mentioned that I was, he was like, well, you know, where is the circular firing squad? Where does it begin and end? And because I have repeatedly said on this show, I'm not all about the circular firing squad, and I typically don't involve myself in primaries. And but as I mentioned to that caller, I said, you know, I've got a congressman here in Oregon, and you know, I used to live in his district. I don't now, but you know. He was my congressman for years, and he co-sponsored a bill saying that it was illegal for states to allow GMO warning labels, in favor of a bill to grant liquid natural gas permits rapidly. You know, no delays there. This is like, you know, doing the bidding of the fossil fuel industry. Legislation that would have thrown more people in prison for longer periods of time. The mass incarceration problem, require ICE to be alerted on certain things. The only Oregon Democrat to support this piece it's called the Resilient Forests Act, which actually isn't about resilient forests, which would sidestep public oversight and all this kind of stuff. His name is Kurt Schrader, and Mark Gamba is the mayor of Milwaukee, Oregon, which is a town that's basically suburban Portland. And he's formerly a professional photographer, used to work for the
National Geographic.
National Geographic, yeah, thank you.
Sure.
And a member of the Democratic State Central Committee,
yeah.
And you know, worked your way up on the town city council and then mayor. And he's going to be running in the primary against Kurt Schrader, our sitting congressman, who, in my opinion, is not doing a good job. Mark, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Glad to have you with us. I just want to get some of this stuff out here. Your city has, under your leadership, and this is a city of 21,000 people, and am I accurately characterizing it as kind of suburban Portland?
Yeah. It's
close
the
enough, anyway.
First city south of Portland,
yeah.
Served by the Orange Line. So
there you go. Okay, so you guys have banned single-use plastic bags along with polystyrene foam at restaurants. You've established a $15 an hour minimum wage for all city employees, which is basically all you can control. You've upped your investments in affordable housing. You've got you've got more green spaces, more biking infrastructure. Last year, you became the first city to use a 1% construction excise to fund affordable housing. You've adopted several ambitious plans, including the Climate Action Plan, to make Milwaukee a carbon neutral city by 2050. The Urban Forest Management Plan, 40% tree canopy in your city by 2040. Housing affordability strategy aimed at boosting the construction and access to affordable housing. All kinds of cool stuff. Mark Gamba, tell us what your vision is for being a member of the House of Representatives. How does this translate from being the mayor of Milwaukee to being U.S. Congressman?
Well, you know, we have so many things in this country that we're failing to address, right? We've got, this is the richest nation on earth, and yet a huge portion of our population is not served by, they don't get health care at all. We have more of our citizens incarcerated than any other country in the world. We have, broken infrastructure and underfunded schools, and you kind of can go on and on and on. And we haven't done a damn thing about the greatest existential threat that's faced our species ever, which is climate change. So my question to people who sort of, like your caller that asked that question, is like, why would we continue to send the same corporate sellouts back year after year to continue to fail to solve the problems that we've had for decades?
Yeah,
and
that's a good question.
You know, I've proven in a city that was when I moved to Milwaukee, it was a blue-collar town, it was a conservative town, and with good leadership, good things can happen. And I think there's kind of this misnomer that there's this red-blue divide, and people are so very different. But if you sit down at a kitchen table with most people care about the same things. They care about their kids. They care about the health, their health care. They care about keeping a roof over their head. They worry about, is the car going to break down? all of that other stuff is kind of noise, but we get pulled in those directions, and I think very specifically by the corporate media, by the corporate infrastructure that is causing us to be divided as a people so that we don't pay attention to what's actually happening to us, which is that the 1% or whatever you want to call them are slowly over decades making the middle class poor, making the poor homeless. Day over day, we have more homeless people on the street, and that's not an accident. If we don't start to address those things in a very realistic way, it's going to be an ugly place to live. And, in 100 years, none will matter if we don't deal with climate change. So I find mayors to be practical people. I work with the other 20, whatever we are now, 24, 25 mayors in the metro region, and 9 times out of 10, we agree on virtually everything. There's a few things that we disagree on.
Republicans and Democrats?
Republicans and Democrats. You'd be surprised. It's a pretty even split in this Portland metro region.
Right.
Because they're practical people. They have to deal with everyday practical problems, and none of them are sold out to the corporations, right? Nobody's writing fat checks to, the mayor of Gresham or the mayor of Oregon City. They're just doing the best job they think they can do for their city. And so I think if we have more people in Congress doing exactly that, the best job they can for their district, for their state, and frankly for the country, we could actually see a positive change in this country, and we could start to see it begin to coalesce again. I mean, it's heartbreaking how broken we are, and it's 95% artificial.
Yeah, and we were talking the other day, and you were telling me the story of how you figured out that having universal health care, having a health care plan for that covers everybody in the country was a good thing. You had an experience in Mexico compared to an experience you had here in the United States. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah. So I was on assignment down in southern Mexico, real close to the Belizean border, in the jungle, way out. It was a 2-hour Jeep drive and then hiking through the jungle. And I got bit by fire ants. And fire ants do this interesting thing where a lot of them crawl up on you and then they bite. So when you get bit by fire ants, you are bit.
So they all bite at once. This is how they kill animals.
Yeah. So turns out I'm allergic to fire ants. Who knew? So I started puffing up, and I was like, great. So I hike back to the Jeep, drive back to the tiny little village, that little clinic. Walk in, young woman doctor. She looks at me. She goes, "Yep, fire ants. Yep, you're allergic." Sends a guy across the street to the pharmacia. He buys a couple vials of this stuff. She gives me an injection. 3 hours later, I'm golden. She gives me the second one. Says, "Take that with you in case you ever bit again." And that's the only thing she charged me for. She didn't charge me for any of her time for the.
And this is because Mexico. This was in Mexico because Mexico has a national health care system.
Yeah. Universal
Everybody's
healthcare.
covered.
Everybody's
in
covered.
And so then you come to the United States.
So 4 years later, I'm shooting in Atlanta, Georgia, and I get bit by fire ants again. Go into the hospital, nice big fancy hospital. I spend several hours in the waiting room, another 45 minutes in the room that I'm supposed to be treated in. Finally, a doctor comes in, again, coincidentally, a young woman. She looks at me. She goes, "Yep, fire ants. Yep, you're allergic." She disappears for a while. She comes back. I'm like, seriously, all I need is to be injected with this stuff. And I've been carrying it for 4 years. And she takes it out of my hand. She looks at it and she goes, "Yeah, that hasn't been approved by the FDA." She throws it in the trash. She gives me an injection of steroids. I'm still puffed up 6 days later. I can breathe, but I'm still... and that cost me $3,000. And I had insurance.
Because you had, a $5,000 deductible?
Exactly.
That's pretty much normal. That's insane. So and it's just incredible. So what specifically, if you were in Congress right now, which of the healthcare plans would you be promoting?
I think I love Bernie, and I think his plan's good. I think Jayapal from Washington has actually notched it up a little bit. Her bill is actually it takes place faster. It covers more things. It sort of solves a lot of the details that people tend to go on and on about. So if we were voting on it tomorrow, I'd be voting for her bill straight up.
Pramila Jayapal's.
Yeah, and I think people freak out. They're like, "Oh, you're going to raise my taxes." I mean, yeah, your taxes are going to go up. Your taxes are going to go up. There you go. And you will pay no co-pays and no insurance payments every month, and your drugs are going to go way down. So in actuality, you're already paying for it.
Right.
You're paying more than anybody else in the world, frankly.
Right. You're going to be routing that money through the government with a 2% overhead rather than routing it through a for-profit insurance company with a 20% overhead.
Or 30.
Yeah. Well, I think Obamacare by law
dropped it down a little
25%. Bit. Yeah. But that's what's going on. What provoked you to get into politics in the first place?
Climate change. So as a photographer traveling around the world, I was seeing the changes occur, and I had read the science years ago. I think the first time I read about it was back when Al Gore was a junior senator, and I had a pretty good sense of what scientists predicted it would look like, and I was already starting to see changes. The coral reefs were starting to bleach. I'd go on an assignment into Glacier Bay, and the guide that I'm with would say, well, this glacier used to be here, and then we'd paddle for another hour to the face of the glacier. And I'm like, is it some kind of cycle that goes back and forth? He goes, well, yeah, there's a cycle that goes back and forth, but this is way past that. This is melting glaciers. And people go, who cares melting glaciers? Who cares polar bears? Well, glaciers for a lot of this country is where we get our water in the summer. For a lot of the world. I mean, this is the glaciers what's the mountain range in Tibet and through China and India. The Himalayas.
The Himalayas, thank you. It's feeding the Ganges. You've got, in the Andes feeding the rivers in South America.
That's right. Most people will suffer greatly just on water shortages alone if this continues. And, there's the 100 other things. People talk all the time about sea level rise, and that's a big deal because we're going to lose a lot of very high-end real estate pretty quickly. But I actually think the thing that people are going to care more about is the levels of starvation that are going to go up. Because if you think about it, the average farmer has some sense of, if I plant this crop at this time of the year, I will yield roughly this amount of food by the time I harvest, right? If you don't know from year to year if you have torrential rainstorms or you're going to, and what's going to survive. And as the weather becomes more and more extreme, we saw it already. The Midwest was underwater for half the year. As the weather becomes more and more extreme, more and more unpredictable, the place where most people are going to feel that, I think the fastest, is that the price of food is going to go up because it is just going to be harder and harder to grow food.
Over the short term, it looks like it's probably going to go down in the United States because we can't sell stuff to China right now because of Trump's incoherent
we need to eat a lot of GMO soybeans. Then.
Yeah, exactly.
100 years from now, if we don't get that one right, none of the rest of it's going to matter.
Yeah.
But when you are a mayor, all of these other things you're confronted with, right? Because you run into little old ladies that are losing their home because the rent just went up 50% overnight.
Welcome back. We're talking with Mark Gamba. MarkGamba.com is the website. Mark's campaign, unlike the guy that you're running against, Kurt Schrader, who's taking corporate money and has several $1 million in the bank right now, you're funding your campaign exclusively with small dollar donations from individuals. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. No corporate money at all, which is a little depressing every now and then. I had a guy that owns a big solar installation company, and he's a fan of mine, and he's like, I'm going to write you a $5,000 check. I'm like, dude, I can't take it.
What is it, the limit, 2,700?
2,800.
2,800, yeah. Okay. Anyhow, we're talking with Mark Gamba. And Mark, you started in politics basically at the bottom. I mean, on the planning commission for the city of Milwaukee where you live, and then you moved to city council, I believe, and then you ran for mayor, and now you're running for Congress. Tell me how this works. In fact, tell all of our listeners how this works. If you're listening, if somebody's listening to this program right now, and they're thinking, the politics in my town really suck, or in my county, or in my state, but in particular in my town, because this is the farm team, right? The people who run for Congress typically start out at the local level. This is how you learn
You hope
politics.
they do.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not many of them have.
Yeah, well, I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah.
So you were at the time making a living as a photographer for National Geographic, and you decided to get into politics. And what do you do? Where do you show up? How do you present yourself? Who do you talk to? Where does somebody start?
Well, it's interesting. In a small town, it's a little bit different than Portland. If you want to run for city council in Portland, you've got a tough row to hoe. But in the smaller towns, if you can gather a group of like-minded people, a couple hundred like-minded people, it is not that hard to get elected to city council. And most people, frankly, don't care. They're not paying attention. It was funny, when I was first knocking doors, running for city council the very first time, the single most common response was, "Oh, we have a city council?"
Really?
Yeah, because they're not used to seeing news about the Milwaukee City Council. The newspaper they're reading, it's all about the Portland City Council. It's really, frankly, not that hard to run. I was actually the director of photography on a feature film while I was running for city council the first time. So I'm sure you have a sense of what that's like, 16 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Sure.
And I was running for city council and still won by, I don't remember what it was, 6 or 8 points against a lawyer who had grown up in the city, grown up in Milwaukee. It's just because I had a couple hundred people that were excited by what I was doing. I had started this environmental group like 3 or 4 years before, to just kind of try and pressure the city council to do positive
Is
things.
this group MUST?
Must, yeah.
What's the acronym?
Milwaukee Understands Sustainable Transition. We were just trying to come up with
So you were trying to deal with climate change. I mean, this is the thing. As a photographer, you got out there, you saw the glaciers melting, you freaked out, and you said, okay, or not freaked out, but you came back and you said, okay, this is the number one most existential issue of our day is climate change, and I'm going to run for political office to do something about it.
Yeah, pretty much.
And boom, on the planning commission, and then on the city council, and then the mayor, and now you're trying to get into Congress.
Yeah. So what that group actually did, we spent a lot of time testifying before the city council and didn't get a lot of movement, but we noticed that all the committees and commissions that are assigned various tasks throughout the city, they would listen, and whatever they said, they would be like, good, we're good, let's do that. So we're like, well, let's get people on all those committees and commissions, and that's what we did. So I got on the planning commission, another one got on the planning commission, and we got somebody on virtually every committee and commission in the city. And just having that voice in the room, that voice of, have we thought about this? Should we be considering this? And a lot of people hadn't. And that really just started to shift the whole dynamic of the city, just that. And then I ran for council 2.5 years later, or whatever it was, and
that was
stopped.
2012, right? Thereabouts.
That sounds right.
Yeah. So if somebody, I tell people, show up at your local Democratic Party, and just say, hey, I'd like to be here. I'd like to be part of this. I'd like to become a precinct committee person, for example. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, the PCPs are sort of the unsung heroes of the Democratic Party. I mean, the races that we've won in many places, many races, to a large part are due to somebody meeting somebody at the door and having a conversation. Yeah. I mean, that's not a usual experience for a lot of people.